Welcome to the Global Journalism Seminars. This is The Briefing. Podcasts are expected to reach over 500 million listeners globally by the end of 2024. While some markets have reached saturation point, there is rising interest in non-traditional markets and new languages. In the Middle East and North Africa, there's been an explosion of new content led by platforms like Sowt, Kerning Cultures Network, and Angami. Sowt, founded in 2016, is an early innovator in the market. In under a decade, they've launched over 30 shows and generated over 12 million listens across multiple markets including Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. When we asked our journalist fellows if they would be interested in hearing translated Arabic podcasting content, 90% said yes. When we asked what genres would most tweak their interest, 56% chose society and culture, and 44% news and politics. Today, we'll meet Ramsey Tesdell, co-founder and CEO of Sowt Media, to ask what advice he would offer aspiring podcasters in emerging markets and the importance of producing Arabic language content in this format. That's The Briefing. Let's begin. Welcome back to the Global Journalism Seminars. I am very happy that we get to spend an hour discussing two of my favorite topics, podcasting and the Middle East, with a real innovator in both spaces, Ramsey Tesdell. Welcome, Ramsey.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to do a brief brief bio here of credentials, although they're far too long. It would take me an hour to read through everything. So I'll just mention that I'm really interested that you studied a Bachelor of Science in Rhetoric and Communication. What a great degree. And also a Master's in Communication from University of Washington, and you co-founded and lead Sowt Media. Tell us a little bit about the origin story. How did you start? What were the challenges?
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm just first off, I'm really happy to be here today. I'm happy to discuss my favorite topic, which is digital audio and podcasts. And so yeah, I mean, really, the story of Sowt has many different characters, like all good stories. But in a lot of ways, it is a personal journey. And so for me, I grew up in the United States. I listened to a lot of NPR and a lot of the great public radio that was out there, and really spent probably too much time in the car listening to those things, but really benefited from that. And then kind of coming back to the Middle East in 2006 to kind of explore the other side of my heritage. I was really interested in Arabic and the early days of publishing and whatnot. And so one way for me to kind of contribute was to work in audio. And so that was something that I was excited about in a format and kind of a medium, and also allowed me to function in a way that I felt that I could really give more to society and more of what I thought I could offer a bit more. And so really the story of Sowt is a personal journey in that sense, where I've been able to kind of explore things that I'm interested in. And some of those obviously have been topics and issues that have become very popular, and also learn a lot about the world and about the Middle East and about Arabic.
How big was the team when you started?
It was 0.5 people maybe when we first started. So, it was a leap of faith in a lot of ways. There's a book, actually, the Queen Noor, the previous queen. She wrote a book called A Leap of Faith, and it really was a leap of faith. We had my wife and I had just had a child, and the story really is that Sowt existed actually in a previous life. It was kind of like an audio social network. You would send audio messages back and forth, limited time, but it was pre-voice note. And so people weren't really used to kind of sending voice notes back and forth to each other. And then I kind of came in and said, listen, like, podcasts are really cool. There's not much out there in Arabic. I think there's a really interesting opportunity for us to create Arabic audio
Mm.
content, specifically podcasts. And so, we had just had a baby. I was paying myself, peanuts, and we did it, and we started off. And so I was the first quote unquote employee, and then a couple of people joined right away after that once we got, the first couple projects.
Audio is not an easy thing to work in when you have a new baby screaming at home. I would imagine.
Yeah. No, thankfully we didn't do too much recording in our house at that time. So
Good. Tell me, you've touched on this a little bit, but what's the significance of creating content in Arabic language? Why is it important that we produce and distribute content in other languages?
yeah, I think it's really important. We have this conversation a lot, and because there's more than one Arabic, there's more than one Middle
Mm,
East, there's more than one Arab,
mm,
and this is what for me, in a lot of ways, is a personal exploration and reflection in some ways, is that the Middle East is a beautiful kind of clothwork of difference. There's so many different languages. If we just want to talk about the language, there's different people. There's different races, there's different religions, and there's really this plurality of things. And I think for us, audio is kind of an interesting way to look at that. And this is one of our major goals, is to look at the differences, to look at the things that bring us together, to look at our world around us, and provide stories around that, provide commentary, push ourselves to think about it, to be a bit critical when needed and when required, and also to question and to think about the world around us. And so that's really kind of what we set out to do. And I think it was really important to do that in Arabic.
mm,
One major reason is because there wasn't a lot when we started. There wasn't much Arabic content, specifically audio Arabic content. And then two, I think it's really important to do that in the language that a lot of people are speaking and a lot of people are living in. And that, in Arabic specifically, you have kind of the formal Fusha Arabic, and then you have different colloquial Arabics, different accents. Different countries have their own accents. In North Africa, they have, French and Berber and other languages that have been incorporated into the spoken Arabic. But there is kind of a formal Arabic that most people are educated in, and most news is presented in. And so, even those decisions into what Arabic we use and how and when, are fraught decisions. But really, for us, we kind of flip that and look at it. And this is a beautiful tapestry that we can tap into, and something that we really, really enjoy. And so we actually produce content in different types of Arabic. We use the
mm,
formal, but we also use kind of colloquial accents when we think that would be best.
mm. I have a friend from Morocco who went on a first date with, I believe he might have been from Jordan, in Dubai, and he greeted her with a colloquialism from Jordan, something along the lines of "May the sun always shine on you." She got very upset, stood up and slapped him because in Morocco it meant something very different. So it really does, just to emphasize, the dialects can be different enough to cause conflict. Which dialects perform most effectively across regions, apart from classic, as you've said?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's a question that we tackle, and we debate uh, possibly more than daily, several times a day. We If you look, so most of the content that we produce is in kind of a Levantine, so like Balad al-Sham, like the area of
Mm,
Jordan, Palestine, Syria,
mm,
Lebanon, in that accent. And then we also produce some in Egyptian. There's a lot. Egypt is traditionally a big media market.
yeah.
Um, but if you look at kind of more the commercial centers shifted towards the Gulf a lot in the last several years. And so there's different ways to look at that. Our content, and like I said, is mostly produced in kind of Levantine accent or informal Arabic. And it does really well in the Gulf. It does well in Egypt too, and it also does well in some countries like Algeria, Morocco, and whatnot.
Mm.
So we know people are listening, and I think there's a bit of a generational shift where younger folks are more used to consuming content. They're listening to a Moroccan rapper, and then they're going to a Saudi YouTuber, and then, a Palestinian or a Jordanian or an Egyptian, Instagram account. And so there's a lot of that kind of switching. And I know if you look at some of the more like almost all the news is presented in uh,
Mm.
formal Arabic. And then if you look at, some of the dubbing that happens, so movies and Netflix shows and whatnot that are dubbed, a lot of that is dubbed into formal Arabic as well. But then there's Disney Plus actually does have they have formal Arabic and then they have Egyptian Arabic, which is
Huh.
kind of traditionally seen as a lot of the old plays were in Egyptian Arabic, a lot of the old movies are Egyptian. And so Egyptian Arabic was, if there was a language that went across the region, there was that. But I think that has shifted as, content and consumption habits have changed over the last, since the internet, basically, the early 2000s. And I think that has sped up dramatically in the last 10 years as streaming, more content has come into the region, and there's more creators from the region that are creating for their audiences.
It's really fascinating. Um, can you tell us a little bit about what you've learnt in terms of lessons for marketing to new audiences, especially a new format to new audiences and such a diverse range of people that you're trying to reach? How do you go about attracting listeners?
Well, I wish we had someone had written a guide or a map for us to follow. But the short and easy answer is that we learned a lot of it by mistake, and we got lucky with a few things. But really, what we've kind of focused on is at the very beginning, the first iterations of our podcast journey. We were focused on kind of producing as much content as possible. Our what we identified as an opportunity was there isn't a lot, so let's fill that gap as much as we
Mhm.
can. That was always that was always prefaced with quality over quantity, but the goal was really to produce, as many episodes as possible. And so actually over the last kind of 3 years, the number of episodes we've produced has actually decreased, while the number of listeners has increased substantially. So that's one thing. And then as we transitioned, as more producers, more people were producing content, more people were getting into podcasts, we actually focused on specific areas. And so we actually looked at kind of specific areas where we felt we could add value, where we felt that we could have an honest conversation, and where we felt we could attract, listeners that would want to listen to this content. And then, in the last couple of years, we've added another complexity to that, and that is really to like, how do we support this? How does this content sustain itself? How do we generate income with this
Mhm.
content? So in some ways, that's been kind of the evolution. And really, I think here, to attract listeners, the way that we did it at the beginning was to produce kind of original, very unique content that nobody else was producing, talking about subjects that nobody else was talking about, or talking about it in a way that nobody else was talking about it. So I think these were kind of the lessons at the beginning. If you look at also kind of the podcast ecosystem, you see Apple Podcasts dominating in that. In the last few years, that's kind of decreased a little bit as other players are coming and focusing on that more. But Apple still probably is one of the biggest platforms that people listen, consume, and distribute podcasts on. And so one of the best ways is to get Apple to, highlight or
Mm.
to put your banner for your podcast on the show. And luckily, we've had a good relationship, with the people from Apple, mostly in Dubai, and they've been very, generous in their support with us and many other people as well. And so that's one great way. But we've also, put a little tagline on all of our shows that says, if you like this, please share it with a friend. Because one of the best ways to attract new listeners is personal recommendations, getting people to share that
Mm.
content. And then, in a kind of a more technical way, a great way to get other people to listen to your content is to get your content in other shows. So other shows that are doing well, either you do cross promotion or you get invited onto their show or whatnot. So there's a few tricks. And again, we've learned all of that the hard way and the difficult, long path. But it's
Yeah.
more scenic from what I'm told. So.
It is more scenic. The best lessons are made in those ways. Tell me a couple of follow-up questions there. How frequently are you able to meet with the Apple team and put forward kind of the agenda of what's coming up and what you'd like to get promoted?
Yeah, I mean, they have a formal request system
Mm.
where you can upload the artwork and you can upload, some of the taglines and whatnot, and they're quite responsive to that. They've always been very supportive. They make time for the most part to chat with us and see what
Mm.
we're up to, and what they're seeing kind of from their side. And so that's been really good. Also, we found that working with content creators, and I'll make a slight differentiation between content creators and influencers. We're mostly focused on content creators. These people, see the world in the same way. We're producing content. We want people to consume our content because they see a value in it. And so content creators are aligned with that. But content creators who have big followings,
Mm.
really good at that. And so we've worked with a bunch of, kind of content creators to produce shows that align with their audiences and with how we see people consuming content, and then we work together on that. So there's different ways to do that, but all the platforms, Spotify as well, has an office in Dubai, and they have a podcast person in Dubai that we're in touch with, and some of the other platforms, we do some sponsorship, and some, they highlight our shows in different places. There's
Mm.
also a newer organization called Thamania, which means eight in Arabic. And they are a Saudi-based media organization, and they have some really big podcasts and video podcasts. So YouTube is a big platform for them, and for many other people. And also, they just launched a new app, a Thamania Radio. It's called Thamania Radio app, which is meant to compete with some of the bigger platforms.
Right.
For that. So there's many ways, and we're mostly, if you look at the podcast ecosystem from kind of a big picture, there's three kind of pillars that you probably can kind of categorize almost everything into. First is content, I would put first. The second is tech, and the kind of the technical back end, and then there's the monetization. So if you look at those three, we're mostly focused on the content pillar, and we think there's a lot of value in that. We think there's a big gap in that, and we think that's where we can offer the most.
Mm. What is back in 2018, 2019, the split was like 80% of people were listening on Apple. And by about 2020, it was around 50-50 Apple, Spotify. What's the split looking like in your region? Is it similar?
Yeah, it's quite similar. I think most of us in the region, at least from what I know, are about just over 50% Apple, and then Spotify's number two by a good distance, but not quite 50-50. There's another local player, Anrami, which is a local audio music, very similar to Spotify, that expanded into other things as well. And so there's a little bit of that, but less so. They don't focus too much on the spoken word. But yeah, I mean, I think it reflects quite. And then if you look at, if you include YouTube in that, a lot of people,
Mm.
YouTube's number one or number two.
Mm.
Actually. And so YouTube, and I noticed just one of the questions, I know we're not there yet, but there's a question about video as well. Our name is Sowt, which means audio or sound. And we're pretty focused on that. And we find that there are conversations that you can only have in audio, or you can have better in audio. And so we're focused on kind of those areas. For example, things that are more sensitive, especially now when, social media and people are kind of screaming past each other, you can have more thoughtful conversations. We don't obviously discount video. We think video is a very powerful format and medium, and there's overlap that should and can happen with that. And so, I think there's a really exciting playground there to play in.
Yeah. Well, that's a question from Mohammed Zidane. It's a very good question. And we might come back to it later. But before we do, tell me a little bit just what goes into green lighting a concept at Sowt? What makes for a good show, according to you?
Yeah, we look, so as I said at the beginning, we focused on producing a lot of content at the beginning. And one of the ways that we differentiated ourselves from other people was that we created narrative-driven content. And narrative-driven content is not to interview kind of talking heads that are talking to each other. It's based on story and, following a story arc. And so we call that narrative-driven content. And basically what that is, it takes a lot more time. There's a lot more interviews, a lot of research. Different people work on a script together, produce a very, thoroughly produced, edited research script, and then that is produced into an audio piece. And so that takes a bit more time. And it's very difficult to get that right. And get that into an attractive audio piece. And so that's where we've focused. So for us, again, we look at a couple of different areas. One is, excuse me, is anyone talking about this subject? And then, can we do that in a way that makes sense? Or if yes, can we do it in a way that's different enough? And can we offer, a different perspective, a different format, a different audience, maybe? And then the second kind of level of analysis that we look at is audience. What audience do we currently have? What audience do we want? What geographic, demographics, etc., would be interested in this subject? And then the third, that, in the past couple of years, as we focused a bit more on this, is creating that sustainability. Can this generate revenue in some way? Can it be sponsored? Can there be ads? Can there be branded content around it or whatnot? And so those are the three layers that we look at.
I bizarrely am wanting to hand you a cup of coffee and can't do that through the screen yet, but take a break for a second and I'll do some talking. I wanted really on the concept of what concepts work to talk about a couple of shows that Sowt produces, and the one that really caught my attention, and the reason I wanted to speak to you this term was Stories from Palestine, specifically because it's telling in this narrative voice these stories of what's been going on for so long there, and humanizing. It's really humanizing content. Can you tell us a little bit about that show, what the reception has been, and what the challenges have been for the past 4 or 5 months of conflict?
Yeah, I mean, the Stories from Palestine is, a show that we launched, in the last couple of months, based on, the war on Gaza. And so I think after October 7th, and it's interesting because we've had this idea for a long time. It was just kind of the right moment to do that. If you take a look at our shows and the content that we produce, we don't typically, what we're interested in is telling the story. And that is often a person telling their own story. And so we're very, very interested in that narrative of people kind of talking about what's happening to them in their life and in their world. And we find, that kind of on the street, close to the ground coverage works really well for the stories that we're trying to tell. So Stories from Palestine is very similar, is in that vein where, people are telling, the stories about what is happening to them. But we also wanted to, because unfortunately, there's so much toxic discussions. There's a lot of bias, there's a lot of dehumanizing that is taking place now. Our focus really there was to rehumanize Palestinians and the conflict in a way that is not picked up often in the mainstream narratives. And so we are looking for stories, about people, about young people, about stories that are not typically, heard or said or allowed to be said. And unfortunately, there's a lot of really powerful stories from that area, and that's the goal of that show, and that's what we tried to do. And we've been the show has done very well. Unfortunately, because of the situation since October 7th. But I think, this is something that we've committed to continuing. And we're actually really excited about telling the stories. Just a small example, there's often, like, why isn't there a peaceful movement in Palestine? And one series that we're unfortunately, again, there's a lot of content to do, is because a lot of the traditional journalists, media people, writers, culturalists, thinkers in Palestine were assassinated around Europe and around the Middle East over the last 50, 60 years. And so there's a whole group of people that are fantastically creative, that were dedicated to a true peaceful and just solution in Palestine, that have been assassinated over the last 60 years. And so I think there's a lot of those interesting stories to tell, and this is a part of the effort to humanize that story specifically.
What's the title of that episode, Ramsey? I want to see if we can find a link and share it.
We don't. It's a coming series,
Great.
but it's going to be under the stories from Palestine. And just for example, like Ghassan Kanafani, fantastic writer, wrote some really powerful essays and stories and whatnot. Another example is Naji Al Ali, who he drew this character of Handala, who you never see his face. He's always looking towards Palestine, and you never see his face. He as well was assassinated. So there's these stories that we think need to be told, and for the most part, we're telling them in Arabic, right, for an Arab audience. And so there's a lot of education and re-education that needs to happen on that. But also there's an opportunity to reach outside of that audience as well.
There's a question from Amy that I want to go to, but before we do, tell us a little bit about Ayeb. It's another fascinating show talking about shame around sex and gender. Tell us a little bit about the concept and how it's been received.
Yeah, so Ayeb is an Arabic word that means like shameful or taboo. And it's probably, if anybody has an Arab parent or has grown up in the Arab world, knows that parents often say that to their children. It's like, don't do this, it's Ayeb. Don't do this, it's Ayeb. You can't do that. You can't go out. You can't do this. And so we really kind of, as we were building this series, we wanted to look at, things that were kind of inappropriate, right? It was one of our ways to talk about the unspoken, to speak about the conversations that aren't happening publicly, but are happening privately with everybody. And we centered on this idea of taboo. And that was mostly focused around gender and sexuality. There's a lot of stuff that is considered, taboo. And those are the things that the topics that we wanted to talk about. And we think that works really well for audio because it's a sensitive conversation. Oftentimes the people who are telling their own story are shy. They don't really want to talk about it on camera, and so audio again works really well for this topic. And some of my favorite episodes that we've ever produced, and some of our most popular episodes, so clearly there's an appetite for this type of content, come from this show. And I think really, it's given us a chance to be reflective as a community. It's given us a chance to be critical. It's given us a chance to be open about these things and gender and sexuality that is changing. And I think, you know, all of us can agree that that is a changing, it's a constantly kind of evolving definition, and we were very interested in that. And so again, there isn't a lot of judgment or experts or leaders or, you know, people coming out and saying this or that is right and this is wrong and whatnot. It's really people telling their stories. And one of my favorite episodes that I like to talk about is a story of a mother who's talking about her son, and he's a bit more effeminate. And it's really about her struggle about supporting him being who he is, and at the same time trying to protect him from being bullied. And I think this is a really personal story. It's a really delicate story. And it really showcases the power of, you know, audio storytelling and allowing someone to be thoughtful and reflective on a topic. And it's really hard to be like, no, I disagree with you, or I don't like you, or I don't like what you're doing. Who wouldn't want to protect their child? Who wouldn't want their child to have a satisfying childhood? And so, you know, you very delicately play that line and provide a space to speak about kind of the unspoken areas, the marginal areas that are very important.
And the intimacy of the format, having someone whisper in your ear essentially, is just so well suited to having those difficult conversations. Amy Isabella Tavar says, are some places where you distribute your content stricter about what you can put forward, and how do you work around those barriers? Is that something that you do, content targeting, or do you leave it to the platforms to do geo-targeting?
So I mean, we have, you know, as most content creators, you have different tools at your disposal, and some things that you can use better than others. Some cost a lot of money, some don't. We do some geo-targeting in the sense that we have ad platforms that we can target, you know, countries. What we're finding is it's less kind of geo and it's more demographic, persona based. And podcasting, the way what is very foundational for podcasting, it's built on a very open system, RSS, which is real simple syndication. Some of the limitations of that are that you don't get a lot of the targeting. And so we don't know your age, your gender, how much money you make, or what class, or what, you know, where you can do a lot of that on kind of the social media, which arguably is quite intrusive, and there's not a lot of privacy there. And so I think we don't have a lot of those tools in podcasting, but the content kind of finds the right audience in a lot of ways. But we are, in the last year, have become much more careful and metric analytic driven about what is a successful show? How do we get it to the right people? Are we pushing the content in the right way, in the right channels, at the right time? You know, when do you publish an episode? You know, in the region, Friday is typically a day off, but now there's a couple of countries that Friday is a work day. Is Friday a good day to publish or not? You know, maybe they have more time, maybe they don't have time. So there's different questions like that.
I think that answers Yazan's question really, really well. I'll do one follow-up there. Do you spend money, as you said, the best way to find new audiences on other podcasts with the audience that you want? Do you ever invest marketing spend in advertising on competitor podcasts?
For the most part, we've done cross promotion. So, you know, I think one of our efforts as a Sowt, as a player in the ecosystem, is to not be as competitive and be much more complementary to each other. But it's still a small industry, and so we've actually had, you know, a lot of success working with other networks to do cross promotion. So we will give them, you know, 100,000 impressions. They'll give us 100,000 impressions, and whatnot. And that is we have done some paid campaigns around that as well. And oftentimes we build in, you know, with content creators and stuff like that, you know, there'll be some extra promotional stuff on their channels as well. And then we do, some media buys across various other channels and whatnot. But to be completely honest, I was looking at this as a negative, and then I was talking to someone recently, and they said, "No, your content has incredible organic reach. This is something that almost everybody is desperate for." So adding the paid layers and the inorganic layers on top of that, actually, you're in a really great place because you already have a really good organic base, which is everybody is trying to get. And so we're just getting into that complexity and being a lot more data driven about the marketing.
Brilliant. There are loads of fantastic product people in the question section today. I'm going to go downstairs in a second to Fran and then to Noe. But before I do, Laura Doying says, before you decide to continue with the product, what are the KPIs you're looking for? When is an audience big enough for you to continue?
Yeah, I mean, we have, like I said, we look at that kind of three different, is the content valuable? Can we do it in a way, does it already exist? Can we do it in a different way that's better? Audience is a part of that, I wouldn't quite say it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. We are content creators. We love our craft. And we try to be very careful in protecting our craft. We're very interested in the story. We're much more interested in telling the story really well than doing something really flashy and just getting a bunch of people flipping through it on Instagram. So audience is a part of that, and it's a very important piece of that. It depends a lot on each show. We have shows that regularly do over 50,000 an episode, over 100,000 an episode. We have other shows that just do a couple of thousand, but we think they're important, and so we keep doing them. And most of it's in the middle somewhere, right? There's maybe 5 or 6 shows that do really well. There's a couple of shows that are in the middle, and then there's a bunch that don't do as well. But I think what's interesting is figuring out how we can be niche. And talk to certain people about certain things, but at the same time on a network kind of level, monetize or work to create some sort of sustainability that allows these kind of more niche shows to continue. Again, our goal is to create this content in Arabic for a new audience. Yeah, it's kind of the voice of a younger generation, and that really fits into how we see the world and how we want to see the world. And also, like I said, going back to some of the interesting diversity in the region, whether it's linguistic or religious or racial or otherwise, not all of that is financially viable. Quite a bit of it is not, but it's important. So we have to make those decisions. We can't do everything. We have to, and you can't quite see, it's a blurry blob here, but I have categories that I hope we can get to. We have a goal of growing those out over the next couple of years, but that we have to be strategic. It's better. We focused on being the best at a smaller number of things than, just okay at a lot of things.
I really love that what I'm hearing from you is collaboration and how do we make this work so that we can carry this one. It's so not Western and so refreshing to hear that approach from someone. Francisca from Chile has a question for you while we get her queued up on video and sound. Can I ask a very sexy question from Mahmoud Al-Najjar? He says, do you think that the Arab traditional media networks dropped the ball on podcasting, so the NBCs and so on?
Yeah. I have to admit that I know some of the people that are providing some of these questions.
Are they your people? They're good.
I didn't agree with them beforehand, but they're very specific questions. No, I mean, it's yes and no, right? I think there's some networks that have done well. There's some networks that have looked at it carefully and done good things. There's some that have pioneers that have then backtracked. And so I think what one of the reasons that attracted me to this space was it wasn't dominated by big networks, and there was space for independent media to kind of blossom and reach a lot of people. And I just want to be very careful with my language. Audience, while there are shows that, don't reach a lot of audience is still obviously very important. If we're not speaking to people or the right number of people, then we're also failing. And so we need to make sure that that is an important part of the definition of success. I think where we prioritize that differently is it's not just about numbers or not just about money. There are other factors that play into that that calculation.
Yeah, which is a perfect segue. Go for it, Francisca.
Hi, Ramsey. Congratulations for your project. I wanted to ask you to talk a bit more about your sustainability strategy. What kinds of monetization have you tried? What's worked, what's not? And maybe what you've learned about the US experience where we saw some kind of bubble that bust. And how do you see it working in the future?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, so we, for us, for Sowt, we look at sustainability. We look at having as many diversified revenue sources as possible. Because if we're reliant on any one, it comes with a lot more risk in that way. So we have kind of a mix of revenue sources. We have grants. And so we work with international and regional and local organizations that provide us because of the work that we do. And then we also work with a number of clients and partners that pay us to produce content for them, essentially, and we work together. Sometimes it's more corporate and commercial, and sometimes it's much more of a partnership. And so there's variations of that. So that the first is grants, the second is kind of service contracts or client partnerships, and then the third and fourth are kind of the four categories that we look at. Are subscription as 3 and advertising as number 4. And so having kind of a mix of those has really helped us, like I said, do some of the content that maybe is not commercially viable, but is really important, and do other content that is more commercially successful, and that allows us to sustain our work in other ways. So this is kind of how I look at it. Advertising is very small still. Subscription is still quite small as well. We're hoping that those will grow significantly in the next couple of years. We've been able to secure long relationships with clients and partners to produce content for them in a kind of a white label branded structure where we produce it for them, but it comes out in their name. And then we also have, grants that allow us to, that support our work in various ways. So, I mean, as you may know, journalism, I would say generally is facing a transformation. Podcast, I think you're rightly to call it. There was a bubble there for a couple of years. There's some crazy amounts of money that were getting thrown around, and that kind of changed. I think last year, our numbers doubled from the year before. We're aiming to double again this year. So I don't see a downturn in that sense. I just see a shift in priorities and a shift in how you can sustain your projects. I think anyone who relies too heavily on any one revenue source, whether it's advertising or working with clients and partners, or even subscription. You even see, like Netflix and, Spotify have freemium models now where it was subscription only. Now there's cheaper ones, but there's ads. And so I think they, are probably more driven by profit, where how can we get more money into but also they're diversifying their revenue sources. So I think we can learn from that and see what we can do. I would say, though, there is a public benefit, right, to journalism and to the work that you do and many of us do, and I think there should be a public mechanism to support that as well. whether that is on a local government, regional, international level, but there needs to be much more support for that.
And just to follow up on that quickly, we spoke a little bit before about a strategy, the diversification strategy that includes things like events and newsletters and all sorts of different. Do you want to talk a little bit about those kind of less audio aspects of the diversification? For example, YouTube strategy or an event strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at some of the, the popular podcasts around the world, and events, I think is an interesting way. I think it's a great way to get the audience involved, to get people also want a sense of community and a sense of belonging, and I think those are really important aspects in a successful kind of long-term relationship with your audience. We've done some of that. The way the region is kind of organized makes it difficult for us to kind of be close to the bigger pieces of our audience, but we're working on ways to do that as well. I think YouTube is a really important platform. What's really interesting is it's a whole economy, right? The reason there's so much video content is because there's a lot of money in video content, right? And I think this is where we're also interested in creating a bit more of an economy in the audio market so that people can produce really good content. They can make a living doing that, and they can do it, in a way that's satisfying to both them as a creator and the audience. And I think digital generally has flipped some of those equations and flipped some of those questions for us as producers and the audience as journalists, the audience as consumers, and us as producers and journalists to we have to rethink that relationship, and we have to and rethink how. But I think YouTube is a fantastic platform. The YouTube Mina guys are really cool. They do some really great stuff, and they're adapting their technology to get in RSS feeds. The one thing that I will say is that a lot of our content that we produce is narrative driven, doesn't transform or allow for a video element very easily. So this is something that we're grappling with and playing in different ways. Do we produce a whole new episode that's a video version? Do we work with a partner to do that? Do we commission that out as a TV series? There's different ways to think about that.
Yeah. On rethinking, let's go to Noe from Argentina.
Hi, Ramsey. Nice to meet you. Thank you for sharing this time with us. I've got two questions. One of them is related to what you have already talked about, related to sustainability and advertising. I was wondering what is the relationship of Sowt with private advertisers. If at any point did you get the feeling of that they were trying to to influence what content to publish, what content not to publish, or to favor a certain perspective or about some topic? And the other question is, how do you think that generative artificial intelligence is impacting on podcasts? Or, for example, in the transcripts of podcasts that can lead to a wider public? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Noe. Just because we're running out of time, Ramsey, I think let's focus on that AI, generative AI tools around transcription and translation. How are they featuring in your plans going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's talking about AI and in very different ways, and the possibilities are incredible. I mean, I think it is a really transformational technology that will that will change the way that we, I remember last October, when it really kind of came out, like almost over a year ago, we I had a moment where I was like, what is my value as a creator? Like, we write stuff, we put ideas together. If this machine can do it for us, what value, what's my purpose? So there was that little bit of that moment, but I think the way, at least I know it's changing quickly, but at least today, I think it's a great tool And I think people should be using it. If it makes you more efficient, it makes you quicker, it makes you better. I think you should be using it. The way that we've used it in the team is we've definitely encouraged people to use it to make their work easier. We've asked it, we've made sure that people generate the ideas mostly themselves and not rely on ChatGPT or Bard or any of those other tools to generate ideas. But if we can make things more efficient and do that, there's also interesting, you ask it to write a headline 15 different ways. That's something that, and then an editor picks, one or two or three of those. Those are some interesting applications. I think we'll get to the point where there will be more and more artificial generation of content. And I'm not sure that will necessarily lead to better content. And I also don't know, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people are thinking about this, but I don't know how public journalism, public good, public interest media is sustained by that. So there's a lot of really important questions that we have to ask ourselves. I don't obviously have the answers for that, but on a very, specific level, we are using it, to generate, text and a lot of content, to edit, to translate. You can put it into different accents. It can do a lot of interesting things.
Let's do a speed round in the Q&A. Zainab says, do you think there's potential for an Arabic to the daily at some point?
I mean, there are two in that sense. None of them have, well, I don't know how popular. They haven't, gone viral like the Daily did in the US a couple of years ago. Thamania has one called Al-Fajr, and Fajr is like the sunrise, it's like what do you call it? There's a word for that moment in the early part of the day. It's one of the prayer times. It's like, what'd you say? Dawn, I believe. Yeah, exactly. And then, so that's a daily news show that's kind of quick, and they kind of hit a few things quickly. And then Al Jazeera has one that's a daily news show as well. And we actually did a weekly show during COVID, and it was called Mustajad, which is almost the same word for Corona, which means like something new. And that we realized quite quickly that it was a lot of work to do that, and we weren't big enough of an institution to do that.
A lot of work to do that, yeah.
Even a weekly show, it was too slow, and it was hard to manage that, and we've paused that since then. But I mean, we're definitely nowhere close to saturation. There's a lot of ideas and a lot of good shows left to be built. So
yeah. How important is sound design to narrative content? Asks Yazan.
Yeah, that's great. Sound design is fantastic. We're probably more careful than we should be with that. We spend a bit more time than we probably should. But we think it's really important, and that's all we have, right? So we think it's really important to make it right and make it good. If people want advice, like make sure your sound is good. And I think, sound design, the music, everything is crucial.
Yeah. How much, what percentage of budget gets spent on like Foley and sound effects and background and buying in library stuff?
We don't have a percentage, but it's not a small amount. The sound, we have a couple of sound designers and engineers like around the world, around the Middle East, Beirut here. We have one guy in Morocco. And, they always send pictures of like weird things that they're doing, trying to get sound effects and whatnot. But we also subscribe to several sound libraries.
Alicia has a question that breaks my heart. How long do you have to wait on a journalistic project? How long do you wait and keep trying before you kind of decide, okay, this isn't working?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, we had... how long do you wait? I mean, each person is their own answer, I think, in that one. But for us, like, we try to look at shows in different ways. We have an investigative show And the way that we got that supported financially was about, governance and accountability and transparency. And we wanted to do that in a way that would be popular for audience. Like, how do you talk about transparency in a way that's cool, that people will listen to it? Well, you can do that in like a crime, true crime series. You can talk about cases around the Arab world that are really important. And that is a part of, accountability and transparency and governance. And so there's different ways to think about that. And, people are always like, oh, why limit yourself just to audio? There's that old trick in creative writing. It's like you write, you come up with a concept and you write all these descriptors and you really get everyone to say all these things about this, the olive tree or the, something, an oak tree or something. And then you say, okay, now describe that without everything that you just said. And so there's these limitations and these ways to get yourself to think differently and more creatively and get out of the traditional frameworks. I would also just be a little bit aware of not trying to do something just because it's crazy or dangerous, or say something about a power or a government or a person. Get in a lot of trouble about that. Be smart about it. So.
Let's go downstairs to Osama from Iraq.
Thank you, Ramsey, for your time. So I got two questions. First, why you said still video-based.
Osama, your sound is breaking up quite badly. Can I suggest that you move to the front of the room, closer to the computer, because the Bluetooth is not connecting well.
Okay,
while we wait for Osama to reposition himself, let's you're good. Let's do it. Let's go for it, Osama.
Okay, good. Thank you. So thank you for your time, Ramsey, and the insight. So I'm curious why you said video-based narrative content is still not working for you. Is it something cultural? Because perhaps some of the topics you said were kind of you said, some were perhaps sensitive or taboo. So people perhaps are not happy to talk it in video version. And the other question I have is what strategy you use for the longer format versus shorter format? Because one podcast I know of is it is doing very well when they cut it into pieces, and it could go as far as 1 million views, versus the longer version that's been 50.
Thanks, Osama. So is video Ayeb, and does short form audio content work?
Yeah, I mean, with our audio content, we looked at it more as what would work for audio and not what doesn't work for video. And that if you look at the stuff that's really popular in video, it's usually two talking heads. It's two people talking to each other, whether it's Joe Rogan or, whatever, any of the Thamania stuff, Finjan, probably one of the most popular, A.B. Talks, things like that. And then the second question was about length. I mean, I think there's value in both, and we do stuff that's shorter and we do stuff that's longer. There's a podcast that I follow, Lex Lieberman, Lexington, something like that. The last episode was 6 hours long. I couldn't believe it. I almost fell out of my chair when I saw how long that thing was. And I was like, even on ×3 speed, it's going to take me, 3 hours or 2 hours to listen to. And so I was like, okay, maybe that's a bit extreme. So, but if you look at the longer stuff in the Gulf, it works and it does reach millions of views. I think it depends on the audience and depends on the topic and depends on what you're trying to say about it.
And then a final question from Umar from Burkina Faso. I'll ask on his behalf about the perception and the reception from different audiences in different countries. How receptive have different countries been to such kind of progressive agenda pushing, or not agenda pushing, but agenda redefining content? Has there been pushback?
I think for the most part, people have been very receptive because the way we do it is it's much more thoughtful, textual than, just other ways. That's one. And two, I think, the stuff that we're talking about is not, it's not from somewhere else. It's from here. These things that are happening here. These are
Yeah.
ideas that have been discussed since, 200, 300, 2000 years, and more. And so it's not, we're really trying to put a lens at what is going on in our community, and less trying to introduce new ideas and whatnot. And for the most part, it's received quite well. But of course, there's always people that don't like it, and they make their voices well known on social media.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ramsey, for all of your time. Very, very quickly, one last question I have to ask you. What podcasts do you recommend to a room full of journalists? What are you listening to at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really good. There's this one called I think he actually stopped producing, but yeah, I could go back and listen to everyone again. The Anthropocene Reviewed. There's one about sunsets, and I mean, it's just phenomenal content. I think there's some UK-based ones too, like Goal Hanger. What's it called? There's the History of Everything, Politics of Everything, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
They're doing some fantastic stuff. I think the New York Times audio is generally really, really good as well. Serial is great. And some of the stuff, I think it's called Stolen. Some of the stuff that Spotify and Gimlet produced was
Stuff. Yeah.
fantastic stuff.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you, Ramsey. And yes, to the person in the comments, this will be available online for playback. You'll find it on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And Ramsey, we wish you every success going forward. Look forward to hearing lots of AI translated Arabic content in my future.
Thank you so much.
Go well.
Take care.
Bye.